Hello my sweet bestie angels, welcome back. Honestly, I love wrap-ups. I love filming them. I love watching them. I love just sitting down and yapping about books. Like there's truly nothing better. So here we are to talk about all of the books that I read in May. All I need is a cup of tea. I wish I'd brought one up with me, but I can't be bothered going to make one now. But anyway, some quick stats for you if you're interested. I read a total of 11 books. And in terms of genre, we actually had a bit of a mix this month. I read 3 romances, 2 dystopian, 2 fantasy, 1 thriller, 2 general fiction, and 1 non-fiction. I feel like I had some pretty mid reads, but then also some really great reads, so I'm excited to talk about them. But also, let's talk about our monthly TBR. If you watched my last video, you would already know this, but out of the 6 books that I had on my TBR this month, I read all 6, which is so exciting. We completed our monthly TBR. However, one of the books was a DNF. I did try to read Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, but I read a little bit of it and just decided it was not the book for me, which is totally fine. So that is the only book on my TBR that I didn't technically read, but a DNF in my opinion is still a completed book because I have completed my time with it. It just sadly wasn't one that I wanted to finish, but that's okay. We have plenty of other really great books to talk about. The first book that I picked up this month was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is one of the prequel novels in the Hunger Games universe, and I actually listened to this one as an audiobook, which I'm actually really glad that I did because I had a few people tell me that this one was a little bit harder to get through and a little bit of a slower read. This book follows President Snow and his origin story. The original Hunger Games trilogy takes place with the 74th games, whereas The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes takes place during the 10th games, so obviously 64 years prior to Katniss and Peter and their whole story. We have this prequel novel. So in this book, President Snow is a teenager, I guess. I can't remember exactly how old he is, but he's studying, he's a student, and at this point, the Hunger Games aren't nearly as successful or loved as they are later in the series, and so they bring in this idea of mentors, and Snow along with a bunch of the other students are chosen to be mentors. So Snow is a mentor. We see the tribute that he is assigned to, and we see the journey that they take through the 10th Hunger Games and then what follows that as well. So you get to understand why Snow becomes the way that he is, and also the involvement that he has in the Hunger Games way back in the beginning, and you also get to know his family and his lineage, and also a few other characters, their background story as well, who we see later in the book. It is actually fascinating. I found it very, very interesting. I thought it was written really well, and if you love the original Hunger Games trilogy, I honestly really recommend it. I gave it a 4.25 because whilst I didn't find it a 5-star read for me, I was so invested and so interested. Not necessarily attached to the characters, I wouldn't say, but I was very curious, and I was I want to know what's going to happen. I need to know how this is going to end, and I feel like it makes a lot of sense for what happens later in the world. And also I remember when Sunrise of the Reaping came out, which I will get into in a second, but when that book came out, which is the other prequel novel that is released, I really wanted to read that one, but I messaged Des and I said, do I need to read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes if I want to read Sunrise of the Reaping, or can I just jump straight into Sunrise? And she's like, I think you should probably read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I'm so glad she told me that, and I'm so glad that I read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because I think it made my reading experience of Sunrise of the Reaping so much better. But we'll get into that now. The second book that I read this month was Sunrise on the Reaping. I didn't have a physical copy of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, hence why I listened to it as an audiobook because my library had it, so I just got it from there. But I did end up getting a physical copy of this one. I loved this book. This book was incredible. If you guys watched my last wrap up from April, at the end of April, I was in a slump. I was like, let's reread an old favorite, and I ended up rereading The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay at the very end of April. So I literally reread the original Hunger Games trilogy. I went straight into The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and then I went straight into Sunrise on the Reaping, and I'm so glad that I did. I think that gave me the best reading experience ever, and I would highly recommend it, especially if you're already kind of considering doing a bit of a reread of the original trilogy. Honestly, it was a highlight of my year so far. I loved rereading those books. I just had such a great time. But Sunrise on the Reaping is also a prequel novel, but this time we are at the 50th games, so the second quarter quell, so it takes place 40 years after Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but it still takes place 24 years before Katniss's game. So in this book, we are following Haymitch. We obviously know Haymitch from the original trilogy because he is Katniss and Peter's mentor, but obviously to become a mentor, he had to play his own game. And this story from start to finish had me absolutely hooked. I loved being able to read about Haymitch's backstory and what District 12 was looking like at that point in time. I thought it fascinating to read about his experience going into the games and the preparation beforehand and what that looked like and how it differed from the 74th games where we read about that later. I thought it fascinating to see a lot of characters that we later see in the original trilogy. Then we get to see Haymitch's actual game, obviously, and we also see what happens after that. And this world is so complex and so layered and so well written, in my opinion, and there are so many underlying messages, so much symbolism. This book was just incredible, and again, I was just so hooked, I was so invested, and this was a 5-star read for me. I couldn't fault it, honestly, and I'm so glad that I got to dive back into this world, because whilst it is so heartbreaking and so sad, it's just so well written. The next book that I finished was Emma of 83rd Street. This is on Kindle Unlimited and it's also on my 25 books to read in 2025. I've read another book by these authors because I think it's 2 authors who write it together. I read Elizabeth of East Hamptons at the end of last year, which is a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it, so I wanted to read the other book that is a part of this little companion series, which is Emma of 83rd Street, and it is based on Emma by Jane Austen. So I think that's like the idea of the series, is that each book in this companion series is going to be a retelling of a Jane Austen book. I had a lot of fun with this one. So obviously, like I said, it's based on Emma by Jane Austen, which is also what Clueless, like the movie Clueless, is based on. At the beginning, we meet Emma. She's living in New York City. She lives in this beautiful house, and she's grown up with her and her sister, and their neighbors, or like the people that back onto their house, are 2 brothers, and those brothers and these sisters become best friends. They grow up together, they spend a lot of time together, and now they are adults and kind of living their own lives, but you're kind of watching this romance unfold between one of the brothers and one of the sisters, and they definitely like don't want to like each other, but you can tell that they just are perfect for each other in a very weird way. I feel like it doesn't quite make sense on paper, and I think that's why it takes them so long to actually get together, but when they are together, they just work. But you're also following Emma as she is studying, and she also meets a girl in her class, and that girl from her class is from a small town, and so Emma is trying to kind of like almost like coach her and help her with dating in New York and like going out in New York. Again, that very classic Emma story, but it's just a lot of fun. I thought it was such a great rom-com. I really enjoyed my time, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. So definitely recommend it if you just want a fun, fairly light-hearted rom-com with some good depth as well, and just, I don't know, I really liked it. The next book that I read was The Rose Bargain. This was a lot of fun. I heard a lot of people compare it to The Selection, and I can totally see where that comparison comes from, because in this book we are following a girl who enters this like competition kind of thing to be able to marry the son of the queen, but she is competing with a bunch of other girls in order to marry this prince, and part of the competition is kind of going through these different tests and trials and things, which just adds a really fun element. But the reason that she wants to marry this prince is not really for love, it's more so because it will provide for her family, and also she has some things going on with her sister, and if she's able to marry this prince, that will kind of be able to help her look after her sister, solve all the problems with her family. In her mind, it will just like fix everything. So she's gone into this competition to try and do that, but someone else kind of catches her eye, and there's a bit of a forbidden romance kind of situation going on. I heard people really going on about the trials in this book, and I love a book with trials. Obviously, The Hunger Games is like a classic trials kind of story. Powerless by Lauren Roberts, love it. Like those sorts of books, I love them, I eat them up. So I went into this book very excited about that, and I felt like the like trials in this book were kind of boring. Like they weren't the main part of the book, and I think because I got really excited about that element, and then that element wasn't exactly what I expected, it kind of let me down a bit. But again, that's not the book's fault, because the book doesn't market itself as that. That was just like what I heard other people say. But overall, I still had a lot of fun. I feel like it's just a classic kind of like historical romance with a touch of magic. It definitely doesn't feel super fantasy-ish, but it is a fantasy book. There is magic. It is just not a huge portion of the book, at least at this point. It is the first book in in a duology, so I wouldn't be surprised if the second book ends up being a bit more fantasy vibes or like a bit more magical. But this book, it didn't feel like the magic was like the main point. It felt more historical than it did magic. But I still recommend this. I still really liked it. I just wish I'd gone in with better expectations. Then I read my one non-fiction book of the month, and I think this is my like second non-fiction book of the year. I read non-fiction frequently but very slowly. Like I'll read like a chapter a week. It takes me a long time to get through a non-fiction book, but this is the one that I've been reading for the past couple of months. This is Investing with Shis on the Money by Victoria Devine. I find the idea of investing, shares, stocks, anything like that, I find it really overwhelming and very confusing. And my husband Liam, he knows a lot more about that sort of stuff than I do, but he wants me to understand it. He wants me to get into it, and I do want to understand it because I think financial literacy, especially as a woman, is incredibly important and just so necessary. And I feel like women especially are just not brought up knowing the same things, and I don't understand why. And so if you are someone who just wants to understand investing, if you just want to start from the basics, if you just want to start as a beginner, I do think this is a great book. It is very beginner friendly, so if you already have a bit of knowledge, you might actually not need to read this because it really is just like the basics. But I found this really helpful, and now I feel like I know a lot more. I definitely am not super knowledgeable. I'm not an expert, of course, but I found this really helpful as a beginner. Again, I don't read a lot of nonfiction. I don't read a lot of finance books. I don't read or know a lot about this subject as a whole, so take my opinion with a grain of salt, but I do think financial literacy is important. This author also has a podcast. I don't listen to it, but if you'd rather listen to a podcast than read a book, maybe that's a great way to go about it and get some more information as well. So do with that what you will. Also, I don't rate nonfiction, so don't have a rating for you, but I'm glad I read it. Then I read Julie Chan is Dead. This is one of those books that you pick up, you read it, you get to the end and you're like, what the heck was that? This is technically a thriller, and in this book we are following Julie, who is an identical twin with her sister Chloe. Julie is a very like normal girl. She works a very normal job, she lives in a very normal house, she just lives a very normal life. But her twin sister Chloe is a very successful influencer who lives in New York City in a beautiful high-rise apartment and goes to these wonderful events and on these amazing trips. And honestly, Julie is jealous. She wishes she lived a life that looked a lot more like Chloe's. But one day Julie gets this call from Chloe, and it doesn't sound good. So Julie decides to go and visit Chloe just to like suss things out, see what's going on, because she's concerned from this phone call. So she turns up to Chloe's high-rise apartment. She walks into the apartment and she realizes that her twin sister is dead. And yes, she is shocked, she is sad, she is confused. But then she says, do you know what would be great? If I just literally stole her identity. If I literally just started living her life and pretending I am my sister Chloe. So that's what she does. So that is like the premise of this book. It is absolutely fascinating because once Julie enters into this world of social media and influencing, she starts to realize there's like some weird things going on behind the scenes, and she kind of gets wrapped up in it, and it just, I don't know, it just gets so much crazier and bigger than that. I think it reminds me a little bit of Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, just that initial kind of storyline with like taking someone's work and making it their own and claiming it as their own. Obviously still a very different premise with Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, like that was a totally different situation, but it just gave me that similar kind of vibe, and just like the main character being paranoid the whole time that someone's gonna figure it out. So I think if you liked that, this could be a book for you. And it is just one of those books where you start reading, and I ended up binging this in, I want to say like 24 hours. Like I read it really quickly because I just needed to know what was gonna happen, because it just kept getting weirder and weirder, and it was just bizarre. It also reminded me a little tiny bit of Bunny by Mona Awad. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend reading it. I did binge it, I was invested, but then I was done with it and I was like, I'm probably not really gonna think about this again. But I think it did what it needed to do. It was so entertaining. The next book that I read was Mad About You by Vari McFarlane. I borrowed this one from my library, so I don't have a physical copy, but I really liked this. I think this is my third Vari McFarlane book. What I will say is I feel like her books are always in the romance section, at least from my experience. Like her books are always in the romance section, and I feel like they are like the least romancy romance books that you could read. Like they do have romance in them, but I wouldn't go into them if you're looking for a rom-com or you're looking for a romance book. They do have romance, but that just does not feel like the main point. I feel like they are definitely those types of books that are on the side of literary fiction or just like general fiction. Like they're kind of like romance, general fiction, but I would say they lean way more towards general fiction, especially this one. I feel like the romance didn't really begin until way later in the book. Like I truly feel like the main purpose of this book was to read about Harriet's story and to understand her as a person. But yeah, we're following Harriet in this story. She is with her long-term boyfriend. She is a wedding photographer, but she doesn't really believe in marriage, and she has communicated that to her long-term boyfriend. But at the beginning of this book, we see them on a family vacation with his whole family, and he proposes. And Harriet is just like, what the heck? She is so shocked and she is so confused because she has told him she doesn't want to get married. She is just like, do you even know me at all? And you end up seeing the breakdown of this relationship, and then you follow Harriet into this new chapter of her life where she is just like, who am I? What do I want? What do I lack? Like, I don't know who I am after this relationship. Like, I've been with this person for so long, we've built this life together, and now that I don't have that, I don't really know who I am or what I want. And so we're seeing her rebuild her life, but also deal with some things in her past that she just never really processed. And that was really, really interesting. And overall, I just felt so intrigued and so invested. I really wanted to know what Harriet was going to do and where her life was going to go and what she was going to build for herself. I just wanted to know more. Like the whole way through the book, I just wanted to know more. So I really, really liked this. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I loved just seeing Harriet understand herself and get to know herself. I just feel like there was so much like healing and like understanding that we got from Harriet through this book, and I loved reading about it. And it was so interesting because there wasn't like a super specific plot. Like it didn't feel super plot driven. It felt very much like we are just seeing Harriet deal with her life falling apart and her trying to put it back together. But I loved it. I really liked it. So I definitely want to continue reading more from this author. Then I picked up Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez. This has been a long time coming for me. I've been meaning to pick this up for so long and I just haven't. And I finally picked it up and I read it and I really liked it. I said this in my reading vlog when I talked about it, but I feel like a lot of people didn't love this book. I feel like a lot of people rated it not necessarily super low, but a lot lower than they've rated other books by this author. And so I think that lowered my expectations. And then I think because I went in with low expectations, I actually had a really great time because it exceeded my low expectations. So I don't know what my experience would have been if I'd went in with really high expectations. Maybe I would have had a worse reading experience, but I really liked this book. I think it was very heavy, and I feel like all of Abby Jimenez's books do have the heaviness to them. They do have depth to them. She always touches on a really heavy topic at some point, whether it's mental health, whether it's an illness, whether it's grief. Like she always talks about something that is deep and that is difficult. But this book just felt even heavier, and I think my main like qualm with this book is that the heaviness kind of outweighed the goodness. And I think heading into this book, I wanted a bit more goodness and happiness and joy from it. But I don't think that's even necessarily like a critique, because I think that was the intention. I think that's what Abby Jimenez wanted to do. If you don't know what this book is about, we are following our main characters, Xavier, who is a vet, and Samantha, who works in marketing. They meet because Samantha has to take her kitten to the vet and she takes it to Xavier, and they meet that way. They go on that date and it ends up going way longer than they expected. And at the end of the date, Samantha is like, I had a really great time. I would love to see you again. However, I am moving interstate tomorrow. And Xavier is like, cool, awesome, that's really great. So now they are navigating this weird relationship where neither of them want to do long distance, but they also get along so well. And they're like, we barely know each other, but we also love spending time together. Is this like worth trying to pursue or is it not? And so they're trying to like figure out what to do. But also the reason why Samantha is moving interstate is because she's moving home to be with her family because her mum has early onset dementia and just needs a lot of care. So Samantha has moved home in order to help care for her mother alongside the rest of her family. So that part of the story is just really heartbreaking to read about, but also very insightful as well. But also reading about Xavier's story is also heartbreaking. Like it's a sad book. So if you're gonna go into this, know that it is sad, but it is hopeful and it is beautiful as well. So I did overall really enjoy it. I just felt really sad. And I think my final rating is 4 stars. Next, I picked up The Wedding People. This is a really morbid and sad premise, but basically basically our main character is not doing well. She is really, really depressed, and she has decided to take herself to this really beautiful hotel and end her life there. Like I said, it's a very morbid premise, so please do not pick up this book unless you are okay with reading about those kinds of topics. However, it does get a lot happier and a lot more hopeful than that. I don't think I would have been able to recommend this book if it didn't have some sort of hope at the end of it. But right when our main character Phoebe gets to the hotel, she runs into this huge group of people who are all also staying at the hotel, and she realizes that every other guest at the hotel is there to attend a wedding. And the wedding is kind of spanning over this week. There's lots of celebrations going on, there's lots of activities happening around the hotel for this wedding, but literally everyone else is there for this wedding apart from Phoebe. And Phoebe very quickly meets the bride of the wedding as well, and for some reason Phoebe tells the bride exactly why she's there and what she is planning to do, and the bride freaks out and is like, absolutely not, I'm getting married, you would ruin my wedding. It's a very selfish response to it, but the bride kind of is the reason that Phoebe does not go through with her plan, and like the wedding is kind of why Phoebe does not go through with her plan. So we end up seeing Phoebe kind of continue to spend time at this hotel meeting all of the wedding people, as she likes to call them, and she starts analyzing them and getting to know them, and she ends up building friendships with some of them and animosity towards others, and it's just really interesting. It honestly feels like you are just people watching through Phoebe's point of view and seeing all of these interesting relationships and interesting behavior. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. I really liked reading it and I found myself super intrigued the whole time, but I just didn't feel connected to any of the characters. Kind of just felt like I was watching from an outside point of view rather than being super in it. I'd be so intrigued to talk to people about this book and see what they got out of it, but overall I enjoyed it. I'd recommend it, and I thought it was just a fascinating read. Then I picked up The Ornithologist Field Guide to Love by India Holton. I really enjoy India Holton's writing. She writes just the funniest, silliest, most ridiculous rom-coms. I have only read 2 books by India Holton, so I can't say too much about the rest of her books, but I had a lot of fun with this. I also gave this one 3.5 stars. I thought it was just so much fun and so silly. But again, I didn't like fully connect to the characters, and I feel like in a romance, I really want to feel invested. I really want to feel like obsessed with the relationship or with the characters, and I didn't ever quite feel that way, but I just had a great time. So I definitely recommend this book. In the story, you're following 2 ornithologists who study birds, and they are on this like hunt to find this really rare bird, I guess, and whoever finds it ends up getting this big prize, and our 2 main characters both really want this, but they are also falling in love at the same time, and very reluctantly. Like, they do not want to be in love, but they basically can't help themselves, and it's just so fun. It's very like cheesy kind of humor, very, again, ridiculous kind of humor, but I just had a great time, and I definitely think I will continue to pick up more books by this author, especially when I just need something light and fun and nothing too heavy, nothing that's gonna make my brain work really hard, like just a light-hearted good time. And the final book that I read this month was Love Just In by Natalie Murray. I actually bought this as like a blind date with a book. Like, I obviously didn't know what the book was. I bought it based on like the description on the front. The reason why I chose this book out of all of the different blind dates that I could have chosen was because on the front it says something along the lines of, for fans of Emily Henry. Like, it was kind of pitched as Emily Henry kind of vibes and like romance with depth. So that was kind of why I picked this one up. And whilst I agree to a certain extent, I definitely wouldn't say this gave me Emily Henry vibes. I think the only reason it kind of gives Emily Henry vibes is because it was like that kind of fiction mixed with romance kind of energy, but I still did really like it. I gave it 3.5 stars. This book is about Josie. She works as like a TV reporter slash presenter, and Josie works and lives in Sydney but has been sent to Newcastle for 6 months to work at like a TV channel, news channel, whatever, in Newcastle. So she's moved there for 6 months, and it just so happens that her best friend from high school that she was super close with, Zach, he also currently lives in Newcastle. So he moved there a little while ago, and basically since he moved, they've had this weird break from their friendship. And so now that she's moved to Newcastle for 6 months, she's like, let's hang out, like let's be friends again. And so you're watching them kind of go from friends to strangers to friends and eventually lovers. And so it's a really interesting story. I really enjoyed reading about their friendship and just like what their lives have looked like over the years, because you get flashbacks as well. And the more you read into this book, the more you find out about Zach's backstory and kind of the baggage that he has and the things that he has dealt with. But you also get to know Josie more, and you get to know the things that she is dealing with and kind of like the mental health struggle she's going through. I would say if you have health anxiety, or if you have anxiety around cancer, please do not read this book, because there's a lot of discussion around that. I just don't think it would be helpful to read, at least in my opinion. And overall I enjoyed it. I'd recommend it. I just think there was some things that I just like didn't love. Like one of my biggest pet peeves in a friends to lovers story is when the characters have other partners that they are currently dating, and their friendship towards each other is a little bit inappropriate in my opinion, which I do think at times Josie and Zach's friendship just kind of went outside of friendship boundaries, which I just didn't like reading about when they have other partners or like they're seeing other people. So that kind of bothered me. I think Josie overall just kind of like stepped over some boundaries a few times, which just kind of bothered me. So I was quite frustrated. I also think there was a bit of miscommunication, which was difficult. So overall there were just like too many times where I was just like, oh, I didn't really love that, for me to be able to like fully love the book. But I did love reading an Australian author write about an Australian setting, and me being able to actually like picture the places that they were going, because I've been there or I've seen it or I've heard about it. So I loved that, and overall it was good. I would recommend it, and I've seen some people like love this book, so just because I didn't love it doesn't mean that you won't. But those are all of the books that I read in May. I had such a fun reading month. My favorite was definitely Sunrise on the Reaping. Like that was the best book I read this month by far. I would love to know what your favorite book that you read in May was, because maybe I'll take it as a recommendation. But I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.